Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, Russian bots take on U.S. gun control, Russia's enduring and expanding Twitter campaign against America. Plus, Elon Musk's SpaceX successfully launches a Falcon 9 rocket this week in the company's first mission since millions tuned in earlier this month for its Falcon Heavy debut. And Uber rolls out its most affordable option to date. But there's a catch. We will explain. But first, to our lead, Russian bots were caught targeting certain hashtags following last week's school shooting in Florida, including hashtag gun control now, gun reform now, and Parkland shooting. It is just one way to widen the divide among the U.S. electorate on how to handle gun control, making compromise even more difficult. This has happened with past issues like the NFL anthem debate and, of course, the 2016 U.S. presidential election. And this ultimately led to Mueller's indictment of 13 Russians for allegedly meddling in the U.S. elections. Twitter and Facebook are facing renewed pressure to do more to expose these bots and fake accounts. So are the tech giants doing enough? We spoke with Bloomberg Technology's Selena Wang and Tara Muller, Senior Policy Advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project from Washington.
Not only did you see the Russian bots come out in full force after the horrific and tragic events in Florida, but you also saw last week the Mueller indictment citing Facebook, I think 30-something times, Twitter and YouTube all mentioned. And that's because the tech companies have a number of problems on their hands. The bots, which came out after the Florida shooting, trending hashtags, trying to create divisions and divisive rhetoric, also, fake news, conspiracy theories. This is not new, but the real concern here is that this same tactic and strategy is going to be taken again in the midterm elections, and the same tactic and strategy is also taken by terrorist organizations who operate on these platforms. So I think what you're seeing right now is just another issue area, a tragic school shooting that Russia is trying to exploit across these platforms, and they clearly still have the ability to do so despite some minor reforms that have been made.
Selena, walk us through the tactics step by step.
What's fascinating here is that there's almost the exact same playbook that's been played over and over again. I spoke to the researcher of the Hamilton 68 project, which has been exactly tracking this, and he says it's almost exactly the same as what happened in Vegas. So day one, these bots are taking just a very innocuous tactic of retweeting and tweeting the breaking news. Then on day two, they're starting to tweet amplifications of the most extreme and divisive issues and opinions on gun control. Then by day three, this is when they start to promote conspiracy theories, and they want to start to destabilize American trust in public institutions, saying that the government, the media, the police are all lying to you. And this is something that we've seen over and over again. You mentioned earlier the NFL anthem issue and the presidential election. So the fear is that this same playbook will then be applied to the midterm elections coming up.
Now, Tara, how big a concern is it that, this could move not just from, sowing discord on social media, but fabricating real life events? I mean, we now know that the Russians were behind creating a real life Islam protest in Texas. Could we see more of that?
Absolutely. I mean, this is right out of the Russian playbook, and they're going to continue to repeat it because it doesn't require them to employ a lot of resources. It's easy, and they've been effective. What needs to really happen here is the tech companies need to take steps not only to get down content that violates their terms of service, but there are other measures that they can take. Obviously, you're not going to be able to control what every individual writes online if it doesn't sort of cross a particular threshold. Having said that, on ad buying, there are specific measures that, Congress is pushing them to take going into the elections. On bots, the tech companies themselves have said they're not in favor of these and are trying to crack down on it. Well, why are there so many bots still operating on these platforms? That is a measure that if Twitter was serious about, I've seen different levels of reporting. I think 15% of accounts I've seen cited as are bots, and then 5% are what the tech companies claim. In any case, there are enough bots up there that are amplifying the messages of these fake news, Russia propaganda, counter, intelligence operations that may influence our midterm elections. So if the companies are serious, there are clear measures that they can take to crack down on some of this and make a real dent in the problem. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that happen yet, as evidenced by what's been going on this week.
So, Selena, you cover Twitter and you know extensively what they're doing and what they're not doing. You know, how are they actually cracking down here when, yes, we know that a lot of bots have been kicked off the platform, but obviously there's still more than enough?
Twitter is doing all that they can, but they have multiple constraints. First of all, this is a company that has had financial issues. They only recently just reported their first real profitable quarter. They are dedicating as many engineers to this issue as they can, but we haven't heard them actually take steps to hire new people to address the problem. Another issue is that even though these algorithms that Twitter has are getting better and better, these bots are changing their tactics much faster than Twitter can keep up. I've spoken to many people on background who work at Twitter or used to work at Twitter who describe it as a whack-a-mole problem. The moment Twitter changes their algorithms to address spam and bots, we see a new type of pattern emerge, and that's the challenge that they're up against. That being said, they have made steps for transparency. They're starting an ad transparency center for political ads. They said in the 2018 elections they're going to be working much closer with candidates to make sure that they try to keep it as free from Russian meddling as possible.
Tara, when you hear that Twitter is doing all that it can, I mean, would you agree, or do you think Twitter can be doing more with the financial resources and the power that it has?
I think you hear that rhetoric coming out of all three of the big players here, Twitter, Facebook, and Google. You hear them repeatedly claim that they're doing all that they can. But I guess if you look at these companies and the amount of money and the size of these companies, they are sort of technical wizards. They're able to do a lot with your data when they want to do a lot with your data. And I think they can do a lot more to address some of these problems that are hitting society, from terrorism to Russian meddling in the elections to other nefarious foreign actors that are going to try to be meddling in various ways as well, particularly when the line is being crossed, and I'd argue laws are potentially being violated, which was what was happening in terms of ad buying. And if they don't fix that, I mean, that's going to continue to be a violation of the real world campaign election finance laws. I don't think the tech companies are going to have the luxury any longer of being able to sort of operate in this free space where laws are potentially being violated and things that wouldn't fly in reality are able to fly online. And I think what's going to happen here is you're going to see not just the public start to get fed up with this, but you're seeing other parts of the private sector, most notably advertisers. You had the Unilever executive a week or two ago threatening not to buy ads on these platforms because, to be frank, ad companies don't want baby product ads or Ben & Jerry's ice cream ads running on platforms where there's jihadist content, where there's Russian bots undermining our elections. It's bad form for advertisers. So I think you're going to hopefully see the tech companies step up. There have been a number of hearings on Capitol Hill, and I think you're seeing a pressure out of the UK, grilled tech executives here in D.C. a week or two ago, and you've also seen them being grilled up on Capitol Hill.
Selena, Bob Mueller has indicted 3 companies, 13 individuals with relation to Russian meddling in the U.S. election. How is that related to the activity that we're seeing now? I mean, are these the same parties who are behind this?
What we're seeing from the indictment is that what Russia has been doing is much more well-financed, well-organized, and sophisticated than what Congress could have even imagined. And I definitely think that's creates some fear among lawmakers and these tech companies themselves. If they can be as well-organized themselves to combat this issues. They had operatives in multiple countries. They had very sophisticated measures to try to cover their tracks. They were buying servers in the U.S., computers here, doing all sorts of very sophisticated tactics to cover up what they were doing. Now, as Tara said, there are many tactics that these companies could employ that they aren't doing. Clint Watts, who has testified in front of Congress many times, who's part of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, says that Twitter should ban all social bots. Now, knowing what Twitter's mission is, this is not something that they would do, but there are obviously more drastic measures they could take. There's also been calls that these companies need to integrate and talk to each other more and have some sort of shared database about these sort of foreign influence networks of bots and figure out how to more easily and effectively target them together.
That was Tara Mahler, Senior Policy Advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project, and Bloomberg Tech's Selena Wang. Well, the Federal Communications Commission officially published its order rolling back Obama-era net neutrality rules Thursday in the Federal Register. That is the federal government journal that lists new agency rules. The move is likely to open a floodgate of legal challenges from parties opposing the changes that empower internet service providers. Mozilla and Vimeo have already filed legal challenges to the FCC's repeal. Well, a loss for AT&T in its proposed Time Warner deal. This week, a judge ruled the U.S. Justice Department does not have to identify whether there were communications between the White House and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. AT&T has suggested President Trump's dislike of Time Warner's CNN swayed the Justice Department's decision to oppose the takeover last year. An antitrust trial date has been set for March 19th. Still ahead, Elon Musk's SpaceX successfully deployed its Path satellite on Thursday and looks to offer broadband internet around the world. That story ahead. Plus, Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes on his new book, Fair Shot, and how Silicon Valley can push back on income inequality. This is Bloomberg. Apple is in talks to buy long-term supplies of cobalt directly from miners for the very first time, according to people familiar with the matter. The iPhone maker is one of the world's largest end users of cobalt for batteries in its gadgets. Apple wants to ensure it has enough of the key battery ingredient amid industry fears of a shortage driven by the electric car boom. Well, a SpaceX rocket carrying 3 satellites roared into space Thursday from the California coast. The Falcon 9 deployed a Spanish imaging satellite and 2 smaller test satellites for a system that would provide internet access to remote regions. We spoke with Chad Anderson, Space Angel CEO, for more.
This particular launch is exciting for a few reasons. One, it carried 2 of the test satellites for their new mega constellation. It's going to have 4,000 plus satellites delivering communications to the Earth. And so this is important for a few reasons. One, it's going to connect the other 3 billion, like you mentioned. It's going to give people options to their current cable providers. And most importantly, SpaceX is still going to Mars. So this is going to be a key piece in their financial architecture that's going to get them there.
Talking about this effort to bring internet access, fast internet access to the farthest corners of the world, this is something that other, internet entrepreneurs haven't shied away from, like Mark Zuckerberg with internet.org. Google has Project Loon. How is what Elon Musk is doing different?
Satellites provide an alternative and a way to deliver these communication services that go beyond the UAV-based and balloon-based things that we've seen previously. So typically these communication satellites are in geostationary orbit. That's very high up over a particular point on Earth. These 4,000 satellites are going to be much closer to the Earth, and which gives you a smaller distance that the signal needs to carry. And so this is going to be incredibly fast broadband connection to the farthest reaches of the planet, on par with new communications innovations coming online like 5G.
Each of these launches, also there are new learnings and progress when it comes to rocket reusability. What did we see happen here today?
Yeah, so this was very cool to see. SpaceX just continues to push boundaries and keep us all interested, right? Even in the shuttle and Apollo years, we saw viewership start to fall off, and it's because people really want to see what's coming next. What progress are we making? What are we doing next? And SpaceX just continues to push the envelope. Today, the fairings that shield the payload, the satellites, came back to Earth, and they attempted to catch them with a giant net on a boat. And while they missed, they came really close, and it seems like they've got a good plan to catch them next time.
All right. You were also at the National Space Council meeting. I know they talked about space entrepreneurship, and there's a move towards the future of space travel as a commercial rather than a government endeavor. What kind of progress are you seeing there?
That's exactly right. And so it was good to be in the room yesterday to hear the conversations. And it's really good to hear the emphasis on streamlining regulation and licensing. They've moved a lot of space operations and space oversight into the Department of Commerce, which is another key signal that the future of space is commercial. And yeah, I mean, the overarching focus in that meeting was really about space entrepreneurship and how the government can continue to partner with them as a customer of services rather than a benefactor or funding the development of new systems.
What is the mood given the messaging coming from President Trump about turning space into the next free market paradise?
Well, we're certainly all been working towards that for the last few years, so it's good to hear the government getting on board with that message. And I think the data is starting to back up the story here in a major way, and we've kind of reached a tipping point where the government's really started to sit up and pay attention.
And what are, we've talked about this in the past, but as space becomes more commercial, what are the sort of safety concerns, the regulatory concerns that you expect to see pop up?
Well, there's a great one with the SpaceX launch today that we can talk about. I mean, they've got three key challenges. One is the FCC licenses for spectrum. It's a scarce resource, and how you send radio frequency down to Earth, and then how you bring this unprecedented amount of data back down to Earth. And then also, how do you navigate the ever increasingly crowded highways in space, right? Space is very big, but a lot of the key orbits are in demand. And so how do you monitor all these things? They provide a lot of opportunities for startups, and we're seeing startups addressing each one of these concerns with laser communications to bypass the radio frequency spectrum, new ground stations that are allowing you to steer them electronically. You can do them for much smaller and much less upfront cost. And in debris tracking, we're seeing companies come in and really do this in a way that we've never seen before, and at a cost point that we've never seen before, being able to track 2-centimeter objects and really give us a lot more situational awareness in space.
That was Chad Anderson, Space Angels CEO. Still ahead, Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes joins us on his new book, Fair Shot, Rethinking Inequality and How We Earn, why he says the American dream is on life support. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Japan's Softbank is working with Nomura on what could be a $19 billion IPO of its domestic telecom business. According to people familiar with the matter, Softbank may market most of the offering to Japanese individuals. The IPO would be Japan's largest in 2 decades. Well, Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes was at the epicenter of the start of one of the biggest tech companies in the world. Since stepping away from Facebook, Hughes has become increasingly aware of wealth inequality in the United States. We caught up with him for a future episode of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, and we began our conversation on Hughes' new book about income inequality called Fair Shot, in stores this week. Take a listen.
I do think that my story is indicative of an unfairness at work in the American economy today, that 3 years worth of work can lead to $500 million in financial reward should give people pause. Particularly in a moment when median wages haven't budged in 40 years, and we haven't created full-time jobs in a decade. We create these part-time, contingent, flexible jobs. So we talk a lot about robots in the future. Work has come apart, and income inequality is only getting worse. And so I think it's important to be honest about the unfairness at work in order to usher us into a conversation about how guaranteed income could restore the American dream.
So, just being devil's advocate, why should we listen to a 1%er about what the solution should be?
I'm not here as a spokesperson for anybody but myself. I'm here to channel a lot of the conversations that I've had over the past couple years, and a lot of the people that I grew up with who tell me that the American dream is on life support. That, when you can't find $400 in the case of an emergency, which is what half of Americans say, you can't find the gas money to go interview for a job or for childcare, for healthcare, all of these kinds of things. So we know from the stats that our economy is fundamentally unfair, and I think a lot of us on the left and the right are casting about, well, what can we actually do about it to change it? And that's where I think the guaranteed income comes in as a powerful tool to address it.
As you came into wealth, how did that shape your ideas around inequality? Did you have your own sort of personal transition?
Yeah, Yeah, well, I mean, I think particularly in my case, where we started Facebook, and Facebook over the course of nearly a decade grew and grew and grew, and I saw my own financial holdings grow and grow and grow for the first years as I was working there. But for several years after, I wasn't at the company. I was working on different projects, I was working for President Obama, I was doing a lot of different things, and yet the wealth just kept growing. And so it gave me pause and made me say, well, what is the source of this wealth? Is it the actions that we're taking, or is it also major economic forces that are happening behind the scenes? And so in a very personal way, after Facebook's IPO, my husband and I decided to give away the vast majority of this money because it feels like it's the only way to address the unfairness that's work that's created in the first place.
Tell me about the discussion.
I mean, when you are fortunate and you come into this kind of wealth, you think about, where did this come from? Why did I get it? And what do I owe other people? And particularly growing up where I did with my family, my husband did with his family, there's a sense that you should always be thinking about what we owe one another.
Silicon Valley has created so many powerful tools and an incredible amount of wealth. And some would say it has also come with a sense of entitlement for some of the richest people. Do you think Silicon Valley is too arrogant these days?
I do think that there is a sense, particularly amongst people who have made a lot of money a lot of the time, and I'm not speaking just about Silicon Valley, but just in general, that it's all because of one's own actions. And I think we tend to underestimate the power of these macroeconomic forces behind. So things like automation, globalization, the rise of finance. I mean, I'll give you an example. In Facebook's case, over the course of the 10 years before it went public, it raised over $500 million in venture capital. That kind of financing wasn't possible 30 or 40 years ago, and it's specifically because of financial changes that we made in the 1980s to create an industry that is large enough to support that. At the same time, everybody else's wages are flat.
Meantime, Uber has raised billions of dollars.
Uber has raised, exactly. Facebook isn't the only company. It's a trend. So I think it's important to recognize that there are many things that are happening in our culture, in our government, in our society that are creating this wealth in addition to any one individual's contribution to it.
Silicon Valley often prides itself on being a meritocracy. Do you think Silicon Valley is a meritocracy?
I think across the board in America, we love the idea of meritocracy, this idea that one person can just work her way up and then be successful. Mark Zuckerberg is the first, he said it in a speech at Harvard last spring, to recognize that the fact that he was able to learn how to code, to teach himself how to code in high school, because his parents had jobs, was an incredible, quote unquote, lucky break that made it possible for him to be at Harvard and for us to create Facebook collectively. So I think that it's a complex interplay between the role of luck and the role of work, and we need to be more honest that all of these successes are a combination of both.
That was Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes. Coming up, one of the fastest growing cloud and data software firms just added a tech veteran to its board. We'll speak with Rubrik CEO and Microsoft chair John Thompson next. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.
Get the edge you need to stay ahead. Subscribe to Bloomberg Businessweek and receive 4 bonus issues free. Bloomberg Businessweek delivers in-depth reporting and provocative perspectives that take you inside the news each week. Bloomberg's 2,400 journalists worldwide dig deep for stories and insight you can't find anywhere else. Take advantage of this special offer. Order now to get 4 free bonus issues of the only business magazine powered by Bloomberg. Go to businessweekmag.com/TV offer. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
The data and cloud software company Rubrik has grown rapidly since being launched in 2014. It hit unicorn status last year with $1 billion plus valuation, thanks to interest from investors like Citi Ventures and Greylock. Now it's picking up the momentum with the help of Microsoft chair John Thompson, who just joined the board and is advising the company. We spoke with Thompson as well as Rubrik CEO and co-founder Bipul Sinha.
The way we built Rubrik is to connect to public cloud and having a single software fabric that goes from on-premises to the cloud. And this unique architecture has propelled Rubrik around the world into the largest enterprises who wants to keep and manage their data.
So, John, you've seen so many technological shifts. What stood out to you as special here?
Well, my sense is that every 15 years or so, there is an inflection point in every segment of our industry. And no innovation had really entered this particular segment for the last 15 or 20 years. And so my view was it was time. And so when I got introduced to Bipul, I thought, why not make an investment in him and the team that he has put together, because it's time for a change in this sector.
So why use this versus what Amazon or Microsoft Azure have to offer?
We actually partner with both Amazon and Microsoft for the data management. Just because applications run in the cloud doesn't mean that the need for data protection, data management go away. So in fact, both Microsoft and Amazon have deeper partnership with Rubrik, and we go to market together.
So we hear this word partnership a lot when talking about enterprise companies, and I'm just curious, John, from your perspective, who's going to own what? And when does a partnership not make sense? It makes sense to own as much territory as possible.
Well, let's be clear. The customer owns the data. Neither Microsoft nor Amazon nor Google or anyone else, particularly around the enterprise space, should feel like they own the data. The customer owns the data. I think as time goes on, however, it will become an issue of who has the strongest share in the enterprise. And clearly, Microsoft has a pretty strong position. AWS has done very, very well, primarily, I would say, with early stage companies looking for a cloud-based platform. For those enterprise customers who really want to move their data and apps to the cloud, they've chosen to opt for Microsoft as opposed to other alternatives. And I think that's a good thing for Microsoft and a good thing for those clients as well.
What does it mean for the up-and-comers like Rubrik?
Well, one of the great things about Rubrik is that it is what one would refer to as the hybrid model. It acknowledges and recognizes that a certain amount of the data is going to remain on-prem for some period of time, and a certain amount of it is going to move to the cloud. So the customer gets to make a choice as to where they might want their data to reside. And that's a good thing for Rubrik, and quite frankly, a good thing for the client.
Where do you see the cloud industry going? I mean, there is all this talk about hybrid, but at a certain point, again, it's about ownership, right? Public cloud versus private cloud. Which cloud will be bigger in the future? Or will this hybrid model endure for the long term?
So for Rubrik, the way we think about our business, we want to manage customer data, enterprise data, wherever it is, whether it's on-premises or cloud or both. It really doesn't matter to us. What we are seeing in the marketplace is large enterprises are looking at public cloud and saying that, how do I gain operational agility by going into the public cloud? And if you look at Rubrik's growth is kind of indexed on the growth of public cloud. I mean, we grew from 0 employees 4 years ago to over 800 employees, $300 million annualized run rate. We just hired Murray Demo from Atlassian to be our CFO. John joined me on the board to help us build a long-term 30-year company. Our vision is that wherever companies want to run their application, whether it's on-premises or cloud or both, we want to be the data management platform.
You're making a huge commitment to your customers to protect their data, and this is in an age where data may be, I don't know, is it more unsafe than it's ever been before? Because hack attacks there are so many bad actors out there. John, how would you sort of characterize the threat environment and the importance of protecting your data with a product like this?
Well, there's no question that the landscape has changed quite substantially from when I joined Symantec back in 1999. There are more experienced hackers attacking us, and quite frankly, there are more geopolitical attacks that are going on, which are hard to separate from someone who's in it for profit versus someone who's in it for intelligence, if you will. And so I think one of the things that Rubrik has done that is quite phenomenal is that they have integrated not just data management, but security management into the platform. So customers get the benefit of both when they go to the Rubrik platform, which is something I had envisioned a few years ago for sure.
Thanks to Bipul Sinha, Rubrik CEO and co-founder, and John Thompson, Microsoft chairman. Well, Citigroup is a financial powerhouse as the fourth largest bank in the United States. And within the walls of the company is Citi Ventures, its VC arm, and a new incubator for internal startups called D10X. It aims to compete with Silicon Valley VC firms that have been around for decades. Vanessa Colella is leading the team as head of Citi Ventures and Citi's chief innovation officer. She joined us along with Bloomberg Tech's Selena Wang.
We think it's really important at Citi that we're constantly focused on bringing the outside in. How do we make sure that we stay involved in cutting-edge developments? And so much of that is being present where entrepreneurs are present, and not just working with them, but helping them to scale their companies. So we work with entrepreneurs who might eventually want to be partners with Citi, but we also work with entrepreneurs who are thinking about expanding overseas and using Citi's global footprint to help understand new markets. So really kind of runs the gamut, but it's all aimed at how do we bring in that outside thinking, outside diverse perspective back into the bank.
And Citi Ventures' portfolio right now is pretty broad. You have e-commerce investments, machine learning, data analytics. So how would you really describe the portfolio strategy here? And is it shifting?
Sure, not shifting very much actually. We've been at this for a while, but the portfolio strategy at Citi Ventures is aimed at both infrastructure type investments. So think things like cybersecurity, right? Incredibly important to the safety and soundness of the financial institution that we run and all financial institutions, or machine learning and data, but also more and more fintech, commerce, payments, which we've been in for some time, though obviously has seen an explosion over the last several years.
So what do you think you have on the typical Silicon Valley VCs, like a Benchmark or a Sequoia or an Andreessen Horowitz?
So what's great about working in VC at a place like Citi is that we can really leverage the 206-year-old history of the company and help these entrepreneurs build their businesses, right? Having been in the Valley for decades, right, this is all about what can you bring to the startup that helps them scale, that helps them reach new markets, reach new consumers. For many fintech startups, distribution is a big challenge, right? They have a great idea, but how do they get out to more people? So I think there's a place for all different kinds of investors in the ecosystem. What we find is that we try and work with our companies to not only help them grow, but help them learn to navigate working with a large, complex organization. It's not easy to know who to go to, who makes the decisions, or frankly, even when to go in. We sometimes think of it almost like someone guiding you up a mountain. It's not enough to just say, when you get to the top, talk to Selena. Someone's got to tell you, which trail, what time of year, who to talk to, and we do a lot of that at Citi Ventures to help our entrepreneurs meet their success.
And as a big global bank, Citi's obviously in a very unique position, and a lot of these fintechs are targeting some aspect of traditional banks, whether that's payments or lending. So how are you looking at the threat that these fintechs pose?
At Citi Ventures, we don't think of it as a threat. The way that we think about it is that what's really posing the change in retail banking and banking overall is changes in technology, which is affecting every industry, and changes in customer expectations. And what that does is it opens up all sorts of opportunities for new players to come in and see if they can do something better, for incumbent players to say, wow, there's an expectation of a customer that I didn't know about before. Well, how do I do a better job to meet that? And I think what you've seen over the last several years is not just fintechs coming in, but incumbent banks and fintechs working oftentimes together to meet those evolving expectations of our clients.
Now, we've heard this time and again from the heads of the big banks, whether it's Lloyd Blankfein or Brian Moynihan, talking about how Bitcoin is volatile. Jamie Dimon said it's a fraud. He tried to take that back. But what is Citi's position on Bitcoin and blockchain as a future technology?
So we've been experimenting with blockchain at Citi for over 5 5 years now. And I think our stance has always been that it's a very new technology and experimenting is the most important thing. Now, it's easy to say experiment with blockchain. It turns out when you're a big financial institution, you've got to build a lot of internal muscle and internal capability, which we've done not only through Citi Ventures and through our innovation labs at Citi, but also through investments in places like Chain.com that are focused on helping large institutions figure out how to explore use cases for the technology. We don't think that blockchain has any one single use. It's more about exploring multiple ways that it might help us deliver better for our clients.
So what are some of those ways? You mentioned this partnership with Chain. I think a lot of people see blockchain as a panacea for all of banks' problems, but is it more just like another tool in the software suite?
I think you really have to think of it as a tool. So last May, we announced Citi Connect for blockchain, which is something we did in partnership with NASDAQ. I think one thing that's important whenever you're working with blockchain, it's fundamentally a networked distributed technology. So it's not something that you can go off to your own conference room and experiment with. And it's one example that we've used of co-creating with our clients. In a world that changes as quickly as our world is changing today, we do not believe at Citi that we can go off and create products and services on our own and keep up with the pace of change. We believe we have to be working with clients, co-creating and figuring out how to bring things to market that meet their pain points. And no doubt over the coming years and decades, we'll all find that there are probably multiple uses of new technologies like blockchain to meet what clients need.
That was Vanessa Colella, head of Citi Ventures and Citi's Chief Innovation Officer, along with Bloomberg Technologies' Selena Wang. Well, Broadcom slightly lowered its offer for Qualcomm to $79 a share this week after the target boosted its own bid for NXP. That's down from its best and final bid of $82, but it said all other terms of the proposed deal remain unchanged. Qualcomm's response to the reduced proposal, that Broadcom just made a, quote, inadequate offer even worse. Qualcomm shareholders vote on this next month. Coming up, Uber is launching its first new product in 3 years. Details from a top Uber executive are next. This is Bloomberg. Uber's go-it-alone approach in Japan isn't working. That is what CEO Dara Khosrowshahi had to say in Tokyo on Tuesday, announcing he is now looking to forge partnerships with local taxi companies. Khosrowshahi made it clear Japan's $16 billion taxi market is already high quality, but said it could be even more efficient. After Japan, Khosrowshahi traveled to India, where Uber is competing against local ride-hailing startup Ola. And here in the U.S., after months of testing in San Francisco, Uber is officially launching a new feature, Uber Express Pool. It is the first new product for the company in 3 years. The Express Pool launch is bringing a change to the current Uber Pool model, aiming to cut out the hassle of detours. The idea is to make pickups easier for drivers, just as cheap for the passenger. Uber's product manager, Ethan Stock, joined us to explain.
We ask riders to walk a little and wait a little in order to have a much better ride. It's both more affordable to them because we can match more efficiently, and the ride itself tends to be straighter and faster.
So how many trips in the U.S. on Uber are actually Uber Pool trips at this point?
So any moment now, we're going to cross 1 billion total Uber Pool trips, which is obviously a milestone we're pretty proud of for a product that launched a little over 3 years ago. In the cities, we're live in 16 cities in the United States, and within those cities, Uber Pool makes up about 20% of the total rides.
So what are the percentage of people who request pool trips who actually get matched?
I don't have that exact statistic, but typically what we're trying to do is we're trying to get 3 people into the car at the same time, because that's where we have the most efficient ride, which allows us to offer the most affordable price. And so I'm sure all of us have experienced those rides where we're the only passenger in the car on a pool. That may feel great for that single ride, but over time it means that we can't offer such an affordable price. So what's great about the walking and waiting that we've added with Express Pool is it increases our likelihood of making a high quality match, which means that we can offer that affordable product over time.
So I was just looking at some of the coverage of it today. Gizmodo saying, honestly, just take a bus. How do you respond to that?
So if you read past the headline, that's actually a pretty good article that talks about the differences between express pool and a bus. We think that public transit is a wonderful complement, and we are a complement to it in terms of what we each do. Public transit works really well on very high capacity routes where you can run large vehicles, and express pool works much better because it's dynamic in terms of its timing, in terms of where it picks you up and drops you off, and also dynamic in terms of its route for those complicated sort of cross-city journeys that maybe pick up and drop off that last mile from a public transit option.
So Uberpool has been sort of a controversial service in that a lot of riders love it because you can get a ride really cheaply, but drivers don't necessarily love it. You know, how do you find a happy medium?
So let me break the drivers don't love it down into two elements. Number one, drivers are working hard and would love to make more money. And so we've actually introduced late last year pick-up and drop-off fees specific to pool to pay them for the effort that they do in order to make pool work as a service. Looking at the non-monetary component, there have been some things that we have done in terms of how we manage the service that made it less fun to be a driver, such as the routes and detours and backtracking that you would often see as we were trying to make a match between two riders who weren't necessarily most compatible. One of the reasons why we wanted to launch Express Pool was to not just make it better for riders, but to actually make it better for drivers as well. Because if you feel uncomfortable sitting in the back seat of a shared ride, waiting for it to make its way around the block to pick someone else up, your driver doesn't feel any better about that either.
How much money do you actually make on Uberpool? Does Uber make on Uberpool?
So that's pretty difficult to break out. We are very pleased with the progress that we're making in terms of overall profitability as a company. You've seen some of the public financials that we released recently, and the curve is quite a nice one. And we're very excited that by making Uberpool more efficient with Express Pool, we can continue on our path to profitability towards a future IPO.
So that's my question is, how much does Uberpool actually contribute to Uber's financial performance, and how much of this is simply driving a mission of more democratized transportation?
So what I love...
I realize Uber is not a charity, but...
We are definitely not. We are a very commercial business. What I love about Uber is that the combination of the mission of making cities work better and provide transportation, I think is going to be a tremendously profitable business over time. And Pool is clearly a large component of that, and one that's going to grow even more with Express Pool.
As Uber starts to look more like public transportation, how does the company think about city-run services? I mean, you know, new CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi said that in 5 years he'd like to see Uber running bus systems and entire city transportation services. Does this move you closer to that vision?
So there are things that we are very good at doing, and one of them is providing highly dynamic transportation options, and the other is building software. And I think both of those things are wonderful complements to what public transit agencies tend to do, which is to have huge fixed infrastructure and to move millions of people incredibly efficiently. I think there are many different ways that we can partner with cities in the future. For instance, we have a pilot with the city of Cincinnati where we're starting to explore with both the city and its transit agency different ways that Uber can complement public transit, not only in terms of coordinating at a data level, but in terms of Uber potentially even taking on some of the lower ridership routes that aren't particularly efficient for public transit to run.
Now, you joined Uber 11 months ago.
I did.
This is just as Susan Fowler's post went viral, kicking off a very long series of dramatic moments and leadership changes. Now Dara Khosrowshahi is the new CEO. What has that been like for you as a new employee, and what do you think about the new guard?
So I chose to join Uber about a year ago because I knew many good people there who were working hard on the future of transportation, and they were people that I believed in, and it was a mission that excited me. And we had a pretty tumultuous year last year for sure, but what I'm excited about is a lot of that is now in the rearview mirror, and those good people can continue to work on the future mission of transportation. And I think Dara has been a phenomenal addition to Uber, and I'm very excited to be working at a company where he's CEO.
That was Ethan Stock, Uber product manager. Coming up, car makers looking to capitalize on your data, the possible regulatory hurdles the effort may face. Next, this is Bloomberg. industry is racing to a new connected future, one in which wireless connections in cars combined with artificial intelligence is spurring in-car advertising software powered by drivers' personal data. But a big question remains. Can automakers profit off all the data they're capable of collecting without alienating consumers or risking backlash from Washington? We spoke with Bloomberg's Detroit bureau chief, David Welch.
Car companies collect a lot of data. Your car knows a lot about you. It knows how many people are in the car because those airbag sensors have to know who's seated and where, and the seatbelt sensors will, the one that beeps at you if you're not buckled in, it knows somebody's sitting in that seat, and it probably knows the weight because the weight tells the car whether or not to beep at you. It knows where you're going. It knows where you've been. It knows where you go on a frequent basis because it sort of tracks through the navigation system frequent destinations and might even suggest your home or your work. So with all that information, if you're driving a certain route, it might pop up ads and say, hey, get this pizza, hey, stop for that Reuben sandwich, or here's some specials on beer and wings, whatever it is. And all that's possible. It's not really happening now. The car companies aren't selling your data at this moment. They do work with some third parties, but they're not en masse selling their data individually. They sell aggregated data and that sort of thing, but it's here to a limited extent, and it's absolutely coming.
And we're talking about all of this being focused on the actual navigation screen. You know, we've talked a lot about distracted driving, but is there a safety issue here?
Yeah, there could be. General Motors has launched something called Marketplace, where you can connect to, say, Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, and you actually order coffee, or you can make restaurant reservations. And some safety groups have already kind of piped up on this and wondered, okay, are we getting into the area of too much if you're sitting there staring at your screen or even glancing to your screen to order up your latte or whatever it is that you want to go pick up? Is there a safety issue? GM has made the system pretty simple so that you don't really have to spend a lot of time staring at it, but the safety groups are already starting to take notice of this, and they're not in favor of it.
Who are the big players trying to get in on this?
Well, look, there's been a battle in the dashboard here between the automakers and then companies like Google and Apple. Those systems right now, CarPlay being one of them, there's already a fight over how much data those systems can access. If you want to use your Apple phone, it'll plug in, it'll basically go on screen, but only certain apps are allowed to go up on that screen and will work with your car. And that's the car company's way of keeping Google, if you happen to be using a Samsung phone and a Droid system, it's their way of keeping Google from mining all of your data in the car. But if you're using, say, Waze, which is a Google-owned navigation app on your phone, Waze knows where you are, and it does flash pop-up ads on the screen of your phone. That doesn't get into the system of your car, but it knows where you're driving because it's tracking you. So it doesn't have to get in the car itself to track your data and give you pop-up advertising or market to you or just know where you are, period.
And last quick question, have regulators weighed in on this yet?
Not really. Look, internet privacy is something where right now it's kind of the Wild West still. There are laws out there, but people are giving up a lot of their information for different services online, and cars are kind of the same way. Right now, car executives are saying they don't want to sell your individual data to marketers. They won't do that. But if you look at the story, a couple of them said they don't want to make that statement forever. They're just saying they aren't doing it right now.
Thanks to Bloomberg's David Welch in Detroit. You can read this story on the Bloomberg.com Hyperdrive vertical, our dedicated webpage featuring our best reporting on the future of transport from teams across Bloomberg News. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology, the best of Bloomberg Technology. Tune in next week when we will be live from Barcelona and Mobile World Congress, speaking with the CEOs of Deutsche Telekom, ARM Holdings, and many more. Tune in every day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.